Thank you for joining us today, and we might introduce ourselves. My name is Jess Francis. I am National Operations Manager for Care Squared, and I'm an occupational therapist by background. And Raina, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi everyone, and thank you so much for sending through that information in the chat. It will definitely help our little presentation along to know who we're talking to. So my name is Raina Rozovic, and I am the State Manager for Queensland, and I also look after Northern New South Wales at Care Squared. And Northern New South Wales, just because it's the most beautiful part of the world, I think. And I am a registered psychologist by background.
Perfect. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Our topic for today's webinar series is how to get the most out of your allied health team. And just before we kick off, I just want to introduce anyone who's not familiar with Zoom, but down the bottom of your screen in the middle, there are two features that we can use throughout this presentation. One is the chat function. So if you want to make a comment or ask a question, you can pop that into the chat. The other is the Q&A section. So you can actually ask a question and then Zoom will allow us to answer it formally. The other thing we'd like to do, if anyone has any specific topics of interest for any future webinars or anything that you would like to hear from people such as ourselves in the allied health world, pop that in the chat for us as well, and we can collate that at the end. Raina, I'm going to hand over to you and mute myself for a little bit.
Yes. Will you be scrolling through the slides? Excellent. Awesome. All right. So we've prepared a little bit of a presentation for everyone. So we've just gone through a couple of slides that talk through our mission here at Care Squared, and I think it is very relevant. So we look at supporting participants, carers, support coordinators, and as well as the broader community by providing the highest quality expert clinical health care. And I think coming back to this slide, talking about better together, reinforces, I guess, the message that we want to get out there today in terms of how we work with allied health and how do we make our allied health team work for us as well. So moving on to the agenda. So there's a few things that we will cover. Is we'll look at what is allied health, and I'll talk about it briefly. What do allied health team members do? How do we go about finding the right fit allied health team member? And then I will hand over to Jess to talk through a little bit more about best practice. What does it look like? What does it mean? And how do we work collaboratively to get what we need out of our allied health team? And how do we get the best out of our allied health team? How do we get the best value, progress, and so forth? They're just a few things, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. So happy to hear more about that. Okay. Thank you, Jess. So allied health professionals, essentially, you're looking at university qualified practitioners with specialised expertise in preventing, diagnosing and treating a range of conditions and illnesses. We often work within a multidisciplinary health team, and we look to provide evidence-based specialised support for different client needs. I also did a little bit of research into just different types of allied health professionals, and I came across quite a big list of different types of allied health professionals. So Jess, if you want to skip to the next slide. Thank you. This is not an exhaustive list. I've actually just taken probably the most common ones, but if you actually do some research, there's a lot more there. On the left-hand side, I have listed the allied health professionals that Care Squared has in as part of their multidisciplinary team, with the addition of behaviour support practitioners. So we have occupational therapists, psychologists, provisional psychologists, physiotherapists, speech pathologists, and we also have behaviour support practitioners there as well. But I mean, the list is certainly not exhaustive, and you know, the allied health professions also include dietitians, exercise physiologists, orthotists and prosthetists, can never say that word, pharmacists, podiatrists, social workers, etc., etc. The list goes on. I guess my big message to everyone out there is that I had to do some research to find out what some of the allied health disciplines that I came across do, and even though I've been in the industry for quite some time, it doesn't mean that you know, I could confidently talk to what each of them does. So it was quite an interesting exercise, and if you want to learn a bit more, I would encourage everyone to research. I did then go into a little bit of more of a deep dive to give you guys a bit of a rundown of what the different disciplines that we have at Care Squared do. I guess noting that the work that allied health professionals do is incredibly varied, and often the list tends to be endless, but I've tried to sort of summarize it as best as I could. So in terms of occupational therapy, it's a branch of healthcare that helps people of all ages who have physical, sensory or cognitive problems. OTs can help those individuals regain independence in all areas of their lives. So that could range from self-care, domestic tasks, as well as community access, which is what we see commonly within our NDIS sort of pool of participants. OTs help with barriers that affect a person's emotional, social and physical needs, and they tend to be our go-to for all things specialist equipment, assistive technology prescription, as well as home modification assessments as well. Psychologists, on the other hand, broadly speaking, most psychs provide assessment and therapy to clients, help facilitate organisational or social change, or administer psychological tests to individuals or groups. Within the NDIS, I guess the context of our role is focusing on recovery, which is about achieving an optimal state of personal, social and emotional well-being as defined by each individual whilst living or recovering from mental health issues. So again, it's that recovery focus, building independence, improving quality of life. Next slide. Physiotherapists, I've picked a few brains internally, a couple of physiotherapists who explained to me, put it simply and said that they assist with gross motor movements and function that enables the participant to be able to partake in physical activity, activities of daily living, community access, etc. So they may focus on strength, balance, coordination, endurance, flexibility, as well as assist with pain management. And our speech pathologists work to enhance people's communication, social interactions and meal times. So they look at all aspects of communication, listening, understanding, organising thoughts, speaking. So they'll zone in on the sounds that we make, as well as grammar and sentence structure, which makes me very self-conscious when I'm talking to our speeches internally as well. They'll also look at writing, reading and texting. So essentially they consider means of communication, their alternatives or supplements to speaking, such as sign language and symbols as well. So again, quite varied. And then I did some memes for everyone, just because slideshows are a little bit dry. But this was my little interpretation of OTs and what they do. So we've got Billy over here. Billy, listen, I'm tactile seeking and you're tactile defensive. Either we go see an occupational therapist or this relationship is over. A little bit of a joke about Pavlov. And then physical therapy being perpetual torture, and a little bit of a joke about our speeches as well. So I hope you enjoyed that. And I think the other one that I wanted to also mention that is very much part of our multidisciplinary team is behaviour support practitioners who at Care Squared we work very closely with. So obviously behaviour support practitioners, we actually ran a webinar a couple of weeks ago where we talked in quite a bit of detail about what a behaviour support practitioner does. So I won't go into too much detail, but essentially they're a very integral part of our team who are working with individuals who are experiencing quite intensive behaviours of concern. And I guess their goal is all around how do we actually work with this individual and their wider support network, including allied health practitioners, to look at reducing those behaviours of concern. So I believe that that link is up on our website. There is a link to YouTube channel where you can look at that presentation, which was very popular and quite, I think, quite a useful one. The other thing that I wanted to just quickly touch on before I hand over to Jess is where do we go from here? So, you know, once we've done a little bit of research and you know, have a better understanding of allied health and who we might want to or need to see or link one of our participants with or personally consult with, where do we go from there? How do we find an allied health practitioner, and how do we prepare for our visits? So I've just put in some points there, and I always, even in my private practice, stress to all of my clients and participants that we need to make sure that we do some research. And I always use the example of, you don't just go to any dentist, or you don't go to a hairdresser that you know nothing about. So it's no different with your allied health practitioners as well. So and you certainly don't go back to a hairdresser that you weren't happy with. So you know, it's all about communication. It's asking the right questions and doing a bit of research. The things you might want to consider when making a decision around your allied health practitioner is the location. So, you know, where is their clinic? Is it close to home? Is it close to work? Does it have parking? All of those little things. Whether you have a preference for a male or a female therapist, or perhaps it doesn't matter for you. Also considering whether the health practice specialises in more than just one discipline. So there's a lot of clinics that will only have psychologists, or that will only have physiotherapists attached to it. And then there are also practices where it has a multidisciplinary team. So depending on your need, that might be worth considering as well. You might want to have your whole team in the one location. You know, have a bit of a think about, or ask about opening hours. Do the therapists do they include home visits? You know, can they offer longer appointments if that's what's needed? Have a think about language or cultural considerations as well, or certainly have a conversation about those if that's applicable to you. But also ask about the treatment methods as well. And I always encourage my clients to find out what are the treatment methods, and if this is what I'm looking for, how, you know, what are some things that you might be able to offer or do, or what's something that you know, is one of your expertise. So find out a little bit more about what they do. So in the case of a hairdresser, you wouldn't go and get, you know, bleached blonde hair with someone that doesn't do colouring very often. So you'd want someone that has that experience. And it's very much the same. It's really about making sure that it's the right fit, it's the right match, and you as the consumer have the absolute right to ask those questions, to be heard and to be provided those answers. Cost is another one. I think it's important to talk about that and to understand what the cost looks like, and that's irrelevant if you're paying out of your pocket or if it's coming out of an NDIS bucket. It's still a service that you're paying for, so it's good to understand what that looks like. In terms of preparing for your visit, again, there are some things that can help things along. So it's a two-way street. We can only do so much, and it is helpful when we have people who attend that are engaged and interested, that have kept track of their symptoms. And I always, you know, in most allied health professions, we're looking for changes in your symptoms, whether that be psychological or physical. You know, what has changed for you? And being able to talk through that and keep track of that does help along with the appointment. Come prepared with a list of questions, and I think, you know, jot them in a little notebook, bring them along with you, because sometimes those appointments can be pretty heavy in terms of information field, and we tend to ask lots of questions that can be a little bit overwhelming. So when you're in that appointment, it helps to have something written down, because otherwise it's not uncommon for people to forget and leave and then think, oh, should have asked that or should have asked this. Bring along any medication or supplements that you're taking. That's also really, really important. Any medical procedures that you might have had recently can be really quite important. And even if it's not necessarily related to your condition that you're seeing the allied health practitioner with, be prepared to jot down instructions or tips from your allied health professional, or it's okay to also ask them to give you some fact sheets to support the information that they have just provided. I find that often it can be information heavy. So if I can find something that I can hand over to my client or participant at the end of the session, it just helps jog the memory down the track when they're reading through it. Thinking about whether you'd like to have a support person, a friend or family member that attends the appointment with you again. Sometimes that can help things along, because they might remember to ask questions that you may forget at the time. And they might also remember some of the instructions or some of the feedback that you've been given at a later date. You can also always contact the allied health professional or their clinic to ask what else they might need to prepare for the visit. And generally, if you've got prior reports or assessments that you can send us, that's really handy, because often then we can just do a cross-check and make sure that that information is still accurate and relevant and valid for you. So we may not need you to go through the full history each and every time, which can sometimes be useful as well. For your participants, or if you're a participant yourself, at the end of that session, it is important to take a moment to reflect and think, did I feel comfortable with this therapist? Because we know that a lot of, and particularly in psychology as well, a lot of, I guess, outcomes rest on being able to form a relationship, trust and rapport with your therapist. Do I feel comfortable asking questions? That's a really important one. And do I feel that they've actually listened to me as well? So just a few tips there. I will hand over to Jess from here.
Thank you, Rana. And just a reminder, if you've got any questions, type them as we go, and then we can address them all at the end in one nice, we should have plenty of time. So I wanted to talk a bit about what does best practice allied health look like? So what should it look like? And if this is not what your allied health service looks like, there's a trigger for you. So allied health should be collaborative. We should all be working together like a team. So it should be a team-based approach. And that is not just the allied health team, it's allied health and you and any other person in what I call the support team working together to achieve whatever the goal is. It should be participant focused, not funding focused, not anything else focused, but participant focused. Best practice allied health should be solution focused. So we're not here to say, oh, there's this problem there and there's that problem over there. No. We need to focus on, well, let's work on solutions to achieve whatever the goal is. Goal focused. The whole NDIS world lives in the goal focused world, which is fantastic, but good practice allied health should always have a goal, no matter what funding or system model we're working in. Good practice allied health should be different. Every experience that you have with them, if you're a support coordinator, might be different for every participant that you're working with. If you're the participant, it may not look different every time you see a different therapist, and that's okay. What you want to make sure is that the services are tailored to your needs. There should be clear and responsive communication, and that comes back to that sort of collaborative team approach. And if you're not getting that, we'll talk about that in the next slide. There should be a really clear boundary and roles. Who does what in this support team? Who's the primary contact? Who makes the decisions? Who's in charge? What are the boundaries on what we do and what do they look like? So best practice allied health in the NDIS world should have three things, in my opinion. One, you should have clinical know-how. But if you have that alone, it's not actually going to do what we need to do. So we need that clinical know-how. We need it partnered with knowledge of the NDIS system and processes. And then we need to focus that and package it in with customer service. And those three things are what best practice allied health looks like. What are some challenges that I see that people have working with an allied health team? And I work on an allied health team, so I'm sure there are more that I don't see. But there's often challenges around unclear roles. So what does each member on this support team do, and where are the overlaps? Does everyone have a clear role? Do they all know what they're doing? Unclear boundaries on the allied health role. And for anyone on the line, who's ever said, what does an OT do? Can they get me an iPad? Inconsistent communication between the support team, I think, is one of the biggest challenges that I see in the NDIS. There's so many people involved, and if they're not all talking to each other, you get things like multiple therapists doing the same thing, or no one doing a certain thing, or just no one knowing what anyone's doing. I think it's important to note that whilst everyone on the support team has the participants' best interests at heart, and I truly believe that everyone does, that it may manifest or that may look different for each person. So everyone's focus or perception of what is best for the participant or best for themselves might look a little different. And if we're not all open and transparent about what that looks like for each other, then it can cause some challenges. I think the other key challenge with the world that we work in is that there isn't always a clear pathway. There isn't always an answer to a question or a challenge. Most people that we're working with have unique situations. So it does require that team-based approach to really solve a challenge or help a person to do exactly what they want to do. I can see there's a couple of questions in the chat box, so I will come back to those shortly. So what I think is really important in terms of getting what you need or what you want out of your allied health team, and whether that's you're a support coordinator, whether you're a participant, whether you're another allied health person, it doesn't matter. These tips work for everybody and apply to everybody. So I would suggest setting expectations up front. And the caveat to that is that those expectations need to be reviewed. So the sort of expectations you might want to set with the people on the support team is, who are they? Who is part of the support team? I have worked in the past where no one knew who the psychologist was. How do we work together if we don't know who they are? The key bit of this is consent. So who does the participant, or in the instance that the participant might not have the capacity to give consent, who does their nominee give consent for the team to engage with? Because if not everyone is consented to engage with each other, then we cannot do that. So that consent is, an informed consent is really important. But set the expectation around communication up front. So how frequently do we want to talk? For how long? Do we want to talk, or do we want it on email, or do we want it on Zoom? What works for me might not work for you. So if we're all open about that and we can agree to that, then we can be on the same page. I think it's really clear up front to know what the agreed goals are. So sure, you know the NDIS plan goals, but in the real world, those break down into some really tangible intermediate or even therapy goals, or even more longer term goals that aren't in this year's NDIS plan. So what does the team agree, or what does the person want to be the direction to attain that goal? And that might be that, you know, they really want to look at SIL housing, and so therefore that's the direction they want to go and nothing else really matters for now. That's okay, but everyone needs to be on the same page about that. I think another key is who is responsible for what on the support team, and this is a collaborative team decision making, but who's going to go and inquire about funding? Who's going to go and ask for the unscheduled plan review? Who's going to update this person at what time? And making sure that, you know, there's no double up on actions, but there's also no gaps in actions. I think the other important thing is who's the key contact for things that might go wrong. So if there's a concern or there's an issue for anyone in the support team, who do they talk to? In a perfect world, that would be the participant in every instance, but we know that that doesn't always happen. So who is that next person? And it might not always be the nominee. I think two really key things in doing all these things, which sound lovely and sound organized and sound perfect, but how are we going to document it? So how do we share that information with each other? And how often do we review it? Because if we just set it once and leave it there and it just floats off into the distance and we never say, oh, that doesn't work for me, then we'll never improve or do better than what we're doing now. I've just got a few tips here. So how to get the best out of your allied health team. And I say this with, as I mentioned earlier, everyone wants the best for the participant, including the participant themselves, but that sometimes looks different for everybody, their perception on what that looks like. So the first thing is be clear on what you're after. So if you come and say, I need this, then just tell me exactly what you need. But also, if you're not sure what you need, that's okay. Also say that. Similarly, the scope of the role. So if you can, be clear on the scope. I need you to do this, but don't do this. And similarly, if there is no scope or we haven't figured that out yet, that's okay as well. It's just about saying we're not really sure, you know, where the boundary between the OT and the support coordinator when we're coordinating SIL sits. So we're just going to work that out as we go. As long as everyone knows up front where we're working to, who's doing what, we're on the same page. I've just realized the time, I will be a bit quicker. If you're not sure what someone does or what the boundaries of their role are, the scope, iPads are a great example. Just ask. I think we've said this a couple of times, but communication is absolutely key, and that's a two-way street. Be open and comfortable in the things that you prefer in a service. So we're here to make your job easier. So tell us how to do that. We are all on the same team. And if you're not happy or something doesn't seem right, speak up. Don't be afraid of feedback. I'm just going to pause there and I might flick to questions. And I'll leave this slide up. So we have, how do you know when you are first starting off with your allied health team, how to allocate the hours? Oh goodness, Alice, that is a fantastic question, and the answer is not clear. You don't always. What you could look to do is say to the allied health team, I don't know what I need. This is what I'd like to achieve. Can you tell me what my options are? And that they should come back to you to say, well, we could do, for example, an assessment to give you some recommendations, or based on your goals, it sounds like you really need to jump straight into working together on whatever. So we would recommend this. It can be a little challenging if you're completely new to allied health or you don't know what your needs are. So I think getting as much information up front is really key, and then asking lots of questions. That's what we do all day, is answer questions. So if you're not sure, ask more questions. There is another in the chat box, wherever it went. Ryan, oh, there it is, chat. Sorry, guys. Are we going to share slides? Yes. And the video will be on YouTube? Yes, Ariana? Oh, Ryan has already answered that. Oh, yeah. Perfect.
I think the only other question, Jess, was, and I think that might be a suggestion of topics to consider for future webinars. And I think it was Alice who posted more about FCAs, the background work an OT might do, and questions they're going through with the participant, etc.
And Alice, thank you for that feedback, because what I'm doing is I'm running an occupational therapy equipment prescription session. Oh, actually, I can tell you when it is. Let me flick to that slide. But I will include that information in that session. So it is session 6. So Rana, help me here. That will probably be week after next.
I can have a look at that really quickly.
Thank you. That would be good. So that specific questions will go into there, Alice.
So that will be the 25th of May.
Yes, great. Any other questions, everybody? I don't want to take your time up. I know you're all very busy and I appreciate your time. Okay. Great. Well, we will definitely send out the slides. You'll have access to the link for the recording as well. And yeah, there are obviously more webinars on our series. So if you'd like to dial into any of them, feel free to join. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.